fact that, again, we're just debating a motion from the Conservative Party to stop our work as parliamentarians is something that I think is unfortunate. But the motion before us and the common slogans we hear from the Conservatives is something that I want to comment on today. And I want to kind of set the record straight about what their slogans really mean. And I'm going to go through them one by one. When they say axe the tax, what they're really talking about is axe the facts. And let me get into this, because we've seen a disproportionate amount of time of this House spent talking about the carbon tax. And the Conservatives consistently misrepresent what this is. This is a measure that's going to contribute 40% of Canada's emissions reductions, and it's also an affordability measure because 80% of Canadians get more money back with the rebate than they end up paying into it. And this is particularly so for low to modest income Canadians, where they get a disproportionate amount of when you consider the costs and the benefits. But the Conservatives don't like these facts. They don't like the fact that 300 economists have confirmed this, because they like to use alternative facts. But what's worse, Madam Speaker, is that they also plan on proposing to get rid of the industrial carbon pricing system to let the biggest polluters off for free. There are, of course, other ways to reduce emissions, but they cost more. They take many more years to roll out, but that's actually what the Conservatives want. So what do the Conservatives say will happen in place? They say we'll have technology, not taxes. Except that the only technology they talk about is A, not proven to work right now, or B, isn't going to be available for many years. Think of things like wide-scale applications of carbon capture and small modular reactors for nuclear. Madam Speaker, we can just look to what their cousins in Alberta have done when they did everything they could to cancel the renewable energy industry that was the envy of the country, and in the process chased away billions of dollars of investment. And really what their plan is to distract by talking about the carbon tax, to delay more action, and dismiss that we need to take real action to safeguard our climate and our future. And Madam Speaker, it shouldn't be surprising, because this is their modus operandi. When they were last in power, they did quite a bit of work to axe the facts by doing things like ending the long-form census and reduce funding for Stats Canada. Without any notice, through an omnibus legislation, they gutted the Fisheries Act and the Environmental Assessment Act. They also muzzled scientists, so they couldn't speak about any of the science that they were doing to the public, especially on climate change. And we also know that they did their best to declare environmental NGOs as violent criminals, so they could use the RCMP to monitor them and weaponize the CRA to go after their charitable status. Because they want to be able to base government decisions on slogans and ideology rather than on science and on evidence. And Madam Speaker, we know this is real because they don't believe that climate change is real or that it requires immediate action to address it. Madam Speaker, they also say that they plan to build the homes, but what they're actually proposing is to block the homes. When the Conservatives were last in power, housing construction got as low as 150,000 units in a year, a number that we nearly doubled in 2022. And when the Leader of the Opposition was in charge of the housing file, a measly 6 affordable units were built across the country. Throughout this time, 800,000 affordable units were lost because the Leader of the Opposition doesn't believe in things like cooperative housing, which he refers to as Soviet-style housing. Madam Speaker, this time they completely abdicated all responsibility for getting housing built, and they downloaded it to provinces and municipalities, and we're still paying the price for that today. And Madam Speaker, to give some perspective, in my riding alone in the last 5 years that I've had the pleasure of serving as representative, our government has supported over 1,000 below-market units that have been constructed. And we've been steadily working with municipalities to support them to speed up the permitting process, and we see provinces like British Columbia that are doing that work as well. So what is the Leader of the official opposition strategy to build the homes? He wants to raise taxes on apartments and cut funding for programs that are getting housing built. And rather than work with municipalities, he and his BC Conservative brethren plan to scrap policies that are getting gentle density going in cities and restrict infrastructure funding. And somehow, I don't understand what the magical thinking is, that if you get rid of gentle density, you'll get more housing. But maybe their plan is to do more things like paving over the greenbelt. But trying to bully municipalities into getting housing built under these restrictions by saying they're going to restrict infrastructure funding doesn't actually mean that much, considering the amount of funding they provided for infrastructure, which, amongst other things, was 13 times less the amount of funding for transit that we provided. The other thing they like to talk about is fixing the budget. But their history has really been about gutting the budget. The Conservatives like to think of themselves as good stewards of the public finances. But the reality is, the last two administrations they had in office completely exploded the budget. They racked up more debt than all previous prime ministers combined. The only balanced budget that the Harper government ran was a few months after that they won office in 2006, when they inherited surpluses. They desperately and unsuccessfully tried to balance the budget in 2015 by selling off GM stock for a song. And let's talk about what the Conservatives plan to do with the budget. They cut services before, they cut military spending to a record low, and they provided huge giveaways to some of the most wealthy people in the country. The Conservative ideology of trickle-down economics, or trumped-up economics, is that the hope is that by cutting services and cutting taxes, they're going to massively be able to grow the economy. But again, Madam Speaker, the facts just don't bear that out. And that's probably why they want some alternative facts to the reality that when they last were in office in the last year, GDP dropped almost 14%. And what are they planning on doing now? They're planning on cutting childcare programs, ending the dental care program that's already providing dental insurance for 750,000 Canadians, and programs that are providing or that are getting housing built right across the country, and programs that are positioning Canada's economy to thrive in a low-carbon future. And Madam Speaker, the last part of their plan is they say they're going to stop the crime. But I would more appropriately refer this as ditching the charter. Madam Speaker, first they want to make you think that we are experiencing some massive crime wave, that crime is at an all-time high, but in fact, when you look at the data, the crime rate is actually lower than many years when they were in office. But they believe that by fear-mongering, people won't pay attention to the facts. And what did they do in the past? In the past, they said by taking tough on-crime measures, that by passing legislation that involved very long mandatory minimums, that they were able to keep people safe. But in practice, Madam Speaker, what had happened is we just had an over-incarceration of many minority groups in Canada, and the courts threw this legislation out for being incompatible with the Charter. On top of that, they gutted funding for the RCMP and CBSA and crime prevention programs, and they disbanded the Integrated Proceeds of Crime Unit that was tackling money laundering. So these things all together put us in a very difficult position, and things like money laundering, which have flourished in the time since then. And Madam Speaker, I think one thing that all Canadians should be very concerned about is that the Leader of the Opposition, official opposition, is openly saying that he plans to sidestep the Charter and invoke the notwithstanding clause. So, Madam Speaker, I think when we look at what the Conservatives actually intend to do compared to what they're actually saying, we see what their hidden agenda is. Their plan for Project 2025 is not one that Canadians want. Canadians want to have an economy that works for everyone, where the least fortunate people are supported, and so that we can build for a prosperous future and tackle the challenges that we have today. And Madam Speaker, that's why I'll be voting against this motion.